50,000 people, not a handful of travelers. Not a caravan of merchants, but a whole army, elite warriors of the greatest empire of the ancient world. They entered the desert and not a single one came out. Not in a day. Not in a week. Not in 25 centuries. No bodies. No weapons. No bones. Just silence. And here is what is striking. We still do not know for sure what happened to them. Historians argue. Archaeologists dig. You have likely heard the beautiful version, a sandstorm swallowed the army, like an ocean swallows a ship. Textbooks retell this so confidently that it sounds almost like a fact. It is not a fact. It is one of the most persistent legends in history, which perhaps covers a much more brutal truth. In the coming minutes, you will learn why the Persian king Cambyses sent 50,000 soldiers through the deadliest part of the Libyan Desert, and why he needed to destroy an oracle he had never seen. As the only source of this story, Herodotus might have been a victim of grand disinformation planned 20 years before his birth. What discovery did Italian archaeologists make in 2009? And why did the Egyptian government demand its fake silence? What do modern satellite images and sand geology say about a route that is officially considered unestablished? And finally, what shocking scenario of the army's demise is today considered the most likely, although it is almost never written about? Forget the school version. This story is darker. 524 before Christ. Imagine Thebes, not the Greek one, the Egyptian one. The city, the Egyptians themselves called Waset, heat over 50. On the bank of the Nile. A camp, but it is not an Egyptian camp. Thousands of tents made of dark wool, stretched along the water. Spears are stuck in the sand in even rows, so even as if they were set by a ruler. Horses drink from artificial channels. A hum of 50,000 voices is heard, speaking Farsi, Aramaic, Median. This is the army of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, the new master of Egypt. Cambyses conquered Egypt a year earlier. Pharaoh Psamtik II surrendered after the Battle of Pelusium. Persia received the Nile Valley, the granary that Cyrus had dreamed of. But for Cambyses, this was not enough. He needed more than just Egypt. He needed Egypt to fall silent. And here is the provocation in the middle of this vast conquered country. In the Siwa Oasis, 500 kilometers west of the Nile, stands a small temple made of sandstone, surrounded by palms and springs. In it is the Oracle of Amun, the very one Alexander the Great would visit 170 years later to hear that he is the Son of God. But in 524 before Christ, the oracle utters very different words. He tells the priests, the foreign king is cursed, his power is illegitimate. The gods of Egypt have not recognized him. For Cambyses, this is not just an insult, it is a political bomb. Persian kings ruled conquered lands through legitimacy. Cyrus declared himself the chosen of Marduk in Babylon, and Cambyses took the title of pharaoh in Egypt. But if the country's chief oracle publicly states that the king is an impostor, every rebel receives a divine mandate for uprising. The oracle must be silenced at any cost. And here is what Cambyses does. He sends an army of 50,000 foot soldiers from Thebes. The route is first west through the desert to the Kharga Oasis, about 200 kilometers. Then a turn north for another 330 kilometers through the Great Sand Sea to the Siwa Oasis. The total distance is more than 500 kilometers across one of the most waterless sections of the planet. Without roads, without wells between oases, with a daytime temperature that reaches 55 degrees in summer. The army departs, reaches Kharga. This is confirmed, replenishes water supplies, and goes north into the sands. No one sees it again. And now for the myth. It was told by Herodotus, who visited Egypt about 70 years after these events. He questioned the priests in Thebes, local residents, and merchants, and here is what they told him. The army left Kharga and marched north for 7 days. On the 7th day, somewhere halfway between Kharga and Siwa, when the soldiers stopped for a break and were eating their midday ration, a wind rose, an unusual wind. Notos, a southerly one, the one that carries sand. It intensified to such a degree that the sky turned black, sand struck faces, clogged throats, tore tent fabric, and this wind did not subside. It buried the entire army alive. 50,000 people were buried under the dunes, like ants under a shovel of sand. Beautiful. Biblically beautiful. The gods of Egypt punished the blasphemer. Amun protected his oracle. Justice triumphed. The priests who told this version to Herodotus were almost certainly smiling. And this was believed for 25 centuries. Generations of historians repeated this version. It made it into textbooks, encyclopedias, and documentaries. A sandstorm. And that is that. Case closed. But in the early 2000s, people who knew how to ask uncomfortable questions took up the case. Italian archaeologists, the brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione. They were not armchair scholars. They were field researchers who had spent a total of more than 30 years in the Sahara. They knew the desert not from maps, but by the taste of its dust. Their methods were simple. They took the route described by Herodotus, overlaid it on modern geological maps, took into account prevailing winds and the movement speed of a foot column with a baggage train, and began to dig. Not at random. They looked for so-called relief traps, places where the geomorphology of the desert creates natural funnels in which sand accumulates for centuries, preserving everything that fell inside. 8 years of nothing. Sponsors were nervous. Colleagues chuckled. The brothers continued. And then came 2009, the area between Kharga and Siwa. About 170 kilometers from Kharga, the Castiglionists find a field. Not a green field, but a field strewn with objects, bronze arrowheads, fragments of gilded anklets, a characteristic element of Achaemenid military equipment, and bones. Many bones. scattered over an area of several hundred square meters. And flint tools, not Persian, but rather Berber or Libyan. Stop. Sandstorms do not scatter bones over hundreds of meters. Sandstorms do not leave arrowheads next to bodies. Sandstorms do not explain the presence of weapons from another culture on the field where an army perished. And do you know what explains it? An ambush. A sudden attack. An army stretched out in a column on a march through the sands, tired, dehydrated, blinded by the sun, falls into a trap. The attackers were nomadic Libyan tribes. The Ammonians, the very people the Persians were going to destroy. They knew the desert like their own backyard. They knew where the water ended. They knew when the army would be weakest. And they struck. It is as if you invited a person who has never been to your city to walk through an industrial zone at night, while you yourself waited for them in every alleyway. Cambyses' army was technologically stronger, but the desert is not a battlefield. The desert is a weapon, and it belonged to those who lived in it. And now, for the bitter irony, if the ambush version is true, then Herodotus was not just mistaken, he was deliberately deceived. The Egyptian priests who told him about the divine storm created a propaganda masterpiece. They turned a military defeat into a religious miracle. Amun punished the unholy. This not only humiliated the Persians, it strengthened the power of the priestly caste. Every Egyptian who heard this story received confirmation. Our gods are stronger than their armies. The Ammonians are the real winners. Yet they were erased from history. Their feat was claimed by the gods. For 25 centuries, we have been repeating priestly propaganda without even suspecting it. However, is it so different from how the news works today? But wait. If the Castigliones found the remains, why have you not heard about it? Why did the find not become a world sensation? Why were the textbooks not rewritten? Here the story takes another turn. And it is connected not with antiquity, but with modern politics. Have you ever seen a haboob not on video, but in person? If not, imagine you are standing in the middle of a flat plain. The horizon is clear. The sky is pale yellow, as always, and suddenly, a wall appears in the south. Not a metaphorical one. A literal wall, reddish-brown, up to 1.5 kilometers high, tens of kilometers wide. It moves at a speed of 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. Inside are billions of tons of sand, dust, and fine gravel. Visibility falls to zero. The temperature inside the cloud can jump by 15 degrees in minutes. Breathing is almost impossible. Particles clog the nose, mouth, and bronchi. This is a haboob, a giant dust storm generated by downward air currents from thunderstorm cells. There are 2 to 5 major events a year. In 2010, a haboob covered the capital of Chad, N'Djamena, paralyzing the city for 18 hours. In 2023, satellites recorded a dust plume reaching the Caribbean islands across the entire Atlantic Ocean, 6,000 kilometers. So, Can such a storm kill an army? This question was asked by Tom Brouwer, a Dutch geophysicist from Utrecht University, specializing in aerosol dynamics. In 2015, he published a calculation model. The input data, 50,000 people in a foot formation, stretched in a column approximately 15 to 20 kilometers long. The terrain is an erg, a sand sea, with dunes up to 30 meters high, an impact of a haboob of maximum intensity, a category that meteorologists record once every 15 to 20 years. The result is that a storm can kill, but not in the way you think. Sand does not bury people like a snow avalanche. This is physically impossible. The density of the air sand suspension in a haboob is 2 to 5 grams per cubic meter. This is a lot for breathing, but negligibly little for burial. To bury a standing person, 170 centimeters tall, a layer of sand at least 1 meter deep is needed. For this, it would be necessary for the storm to carry not dust, but entire dunes. This does not happen. Here is what actually kills. First, asphyxiation. Fine dust, particles from 5 to 50 microns in size, penetrates the lungs and causes acute respiratory distress. It is as if you were inhaling cement wet. Heavy, clogging the alveoli. Second, disorientation. In zero visibility, people lose direction in minutes. The column disintegrates. Groups go in different directions. In a desert without landmarks, a deviation of 5 degrees from the course means that after 20 kilometers, you will miss the oasis by 2 kilometers. Third, dehydration. A haboob lasts from 30 minutes to several hours. But after it comes a calm and heat, and people who have lost the baggage train with water, lost each other, and lost direction, die within the next 24 to 36 hours quietly. On the B1, Brouwer's model says, the storm does not bury the army. The storm breaks the army, turns a single organism into 50,000 separate dying people. And then the desert finishes the work slowly over days. And here is the blow. This means that both versions, both Herodotus's and the Castellanus, could be true simultaneously. The storm could have struck first, broken the formation, destroyed the water supplies, and turned the army into a crowd. And then the Ammonians came to finish off the demoralized, dehydrated, blinded people wandering through the sands without command and without direction. Not a feat. This is a harvest. Imagine it. You are a Libyan nomad. You see the black wall of a haboob covering the enemy column. You wait out the storm in a rock shelter that you have known since childhood. The storm subsides. You come out. Before you are thousands of people scattered across the sands, coughing up blood, crawling blindly. Their weapons are covered with sand. Their officers are lost. Their horses are dead or scattered. You do not even need to be a warrior. It is enough to be a local, and here is the bitterness. If the combined version is true, then Cambyses' army was killed not by nature and not by people. It was killed by overconfidence. The decision to send 50,000 people through territory you do not know against an enemy who knows this territory better than you know your own palace. This is not ancient history. It is a template. Napoleon in Russia, the British in Afghanistan, the Americans in Vietnam. Technological superiority against geography. Geography always wins. But here is what gives no rest. If thousands of bodies remained scattered across the desert after the storm, where are they? 25 centuries is a long time. But bones in a dry climate are preserved for millennia. There should be many of them. They should be visible. Satellites today distinguish objects 30 centimeters in size. So why have we found so few? Here is a number for you, 300,000 square kilometers. This is the area of the Great Sand Sea, the region between the Kharga, Siwa, and Kharga Oasis. For scale, this is the territory of Italy. The whole of Italy, and all of it is covered with dunes. Not picturesque little hills from tourism advertisements, but géant dune, so-called drap, up to 120 meters high and 100 kilometers long. They are arranged in parallel ridges, like furrows in a giant's field. Between them are corridors from 1 to 3 kilometers wide. And these corridors are the only bulk path along which a column can move. This is exactly what Olaf Kaper, a German geographer from the University of Cologne, understood when in 2014 he tried to reconstruct the route of Cambyses' army not from texts, but from the relief. His method was elegant. Kaper took radar topography data from the SRTM satellite. This is a system that sees through the upper layer of sand to a depth of up to 5 meters. He overlaid this data on a map of prevailing winds, a geological map of underground aquifers, and high-resolution satellite images, and asked a simple question. If you were the commander of a foot column of 50,000 people, what route would you take from Kharga to Siwa? The answer turned out to be unexpected. There are exactly 2 routes, not 10, not 5. The relief of the dunes forms natural corridors, and all other directions are physically impassable for a large group with a baggage train. The first route is western longer, but with possible access to underground water through shallow wells. The second is direct 70 kilometers shorter, but passing through a zone where groundwater lies at a depth of more than 100 meters. That is, a zone of absolute waterlessness with a length of 160 kilometers. 4 to 5 days of travel for a loaded column without a single sip of water, except what you carry with you. And here is the question that Kaper asked: how much water do 50,000 people need for 5 days of marching? In Saharan conditions, let's calculate. The minimum survival norm in the desert is 7 liters per person per day. This is not comfort. This is the boundary beyond which heatstroke begins. 50,000 times 7 is 350,000 liters a day for 5 days. 1,750,000 liters. That is 1,000 750 tons of water alone, without food, without forage for pack animals, without a reserve for losses. For the transportation of such a volume, about 4,000 camels are needed. Each carries 400 liters. That is the maximum load. But camels also drink on the move in the heat up to 30 liters every 3 days. That means more water is needed for the camels. That means more camels are needed for that water. The equation begins to devour itself, like a snake biting its own tail. Kaper calculated that on the direct route, the logistics of water supply become mathematically impossible around the third day. Not difficult, impossible. The numbers simply do not add up. The water runs out before the column passes through the waterless section. And here is the turn. What if the army did not go to Siwa directly? What if it did not go to Siwa at all? In 2017, Professor Rolf Krauss from Berlin University proposed a hypothesis that turned the entire process, geography of the problem upside down. He drew attention to a detail that everyone else was missing. Herodotus writes, "The army left Kharga and marched for 7 days." But Herodotus does not say north. He says through the sand. The direction is the interpretation of translators. What if the column moved not north to Siwa, but west to the Dakhla Oasis? It is more logical. Dakhla is closer. Only 150 kilometers from Kharga. There is water there, provision, and the possibility of regrouping. And already from Dakhla north to Siwa, along a route where the distance between water points does not exceed 80 kilometers. In other words, Cambyses might not have been a madman, but a logician. His staff could have planned a route with intermediate stops, and the army could have perished, not in the Great Sand Sea, but on a completely different section between Kharga and Dakhla, or between Dakhla and Siwa. This changes everything. Because if we are looking in the wrong place, of course, we find nothing. 300,000 square kilometers. The territory of Italy. And we are possibly digging in the wrong half. The irony is this: we send Mars rovers to another planet. We map the ocean floor at a depth of 11 kilometers. We found the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic. But we cannot find 50,000 people on our own planet 300 kilometers from the nearest airport. Because the Sahara is not just a desert, it is a machine. It moves dunes by tens of meters a year. It buries, exposes, and again buries the same sections in cycles lasting centuries. What lay on the surface in the time of Cambyses could today be under 20 meters of sand. And tomorrow, back on the surface. You just need to be in the right place in the right decade. And here, the story makes a feint that no one expected, because while geologists were counting liters and archaeologists were arguing about routes, something was found in the Iranian archives that calls into question the very basis of this story, not the route, not the storm, not the ambush, but the figure of 50,000 itself. 50,000. Say it out loud. 50,000 people. That is the population of a medium-sized European city. That is a stadium packed to capacity. That is a column that, with a width of 10 people and a distance of a meter between rows, would stretch for 5 kilometers without a baggage train. With a baggage train, pack animals, supplies, and field kitchens for 15 to 20. This figure has migrated from book to book for 25 centuries. And almost no one, asks where it came from. The answer, from Herodotus. Only from Herodotus. No other ancient source names this figure. Not Ctesias. Not Diodorus Sigillus. Not Strabo. And Herodotus, let's be honest, was not present at the events. He visited Egypt in approximately the 450s before Christ, 70 years after the disappearance of the army. He heard this story from Egyptian priests, the very same priests, as we have already established, had every reason to turn a military defeat into a divine miracle, and the priests needed a big number, a huge one, because the larger the army, the more grand the miracle of Amun. To destroy 5,000 soldiers is a military failure. To destroy 50,000 is the will of the gods. The difference is not quantitative, it is qualitative. It turns the event from news into a myth. In 2019, Iranian historian Touraj Daryai from the University of California at Irvine published a study in which he compared Herodotus's data with what we know about the real size of Persian expeditionary corps of the Achaemenid era and the source's cuneiform tablets from Persepolis, the so-called fortification archive. These are accounting documents who received grain, how much meat was issued to the garrison, which detachment got how many rations, the accounting of an empire boring, duste, and mercilessly accurate. The picture the tablets paint is sobering. A typical punitive corps sent to suppress a rebellion in a distant province numbered from 5 to 10,000 people, a maximum of 15,000, and that was for large campaigns. 50,000 is the strength of Cambyses' entire invasion army in Egypt, the entire force he brought to conquer a whole state. The idea that he sent an equivalent army just to destroy one temple in an oasis is absurd. It is like sending the entire Pacific Fleet to detain one fishing boat. Daryai suggests the real size of the detachment sent to Siwa was from 5 to 10,000 people, possibly even fewer, enough to intimidate the priests and destroy the temple, not enough to guarantee survival in the desert under any circumstances. And do you know what that changes? Everything. 5,000 people is completely different logistics. A different amount of water, a different column length, a different marching speed, a different vulnerability to attack. 5,000 people in a sandstorm is a catastrophe, but not mysticism. 5,000 people in a nomad ambush is a tragedy, but an explainable one. 5,000 bodies scattered across the Sahara and buried over 25 centuries is not a mystical disappearance. It is simply entropy. Nature took back its own, and the sand did the rest. And if the army was small, then the defeat was small. and a small defeat is a bad story. Bad for the Egyptian priests who need the miracle of Amun. Bad for Greek historians who need drama. Bad for us, because 5,000 soldiers dying from thirst and nomad attacks is one sentence in a textbook, not a mystery of the millennium. And here is the bitter truth of this block, perhaps. Just perhaps. There is no great mystery. There is an inflated figure that turned a routine military defeat into a legend. This story is an ideal model of how human knowledge works. Does this remind you of anything? Look at today's world. We are drowning in information. We read news that is written by people with interests. We forward them to friends without checking. In a year, the forwarded becomes common knowledge. In 10, a historical fact, and in 100, it will be studied in universities. The mechanism has not changed one iota. Only the speed has changed. The priests of Amun needed 70 years for their version to reach Herodotus. Today, 70 seconds and one repost are enough. 50,000 people entered the desert. Or 5,000, we still do not know for sure. But we know one thing for certain. The most dangerous storm is not the one that buries a body in sand, but the one that buries the truth in words. And this storm has not subsided to this